Hi, and welcome to this video and this lesson series that we're going to be doing on drawing for animation. I'm very glad that you've joined me, and I look forward to the next little while where we're working together and doing some interesting drawings. Now, what I would like to do is I want to sort of cut through the introductory type of blab and just get right to the drawing. So we're sitting here at my desk and I'm ready to draw. And what I'll do is I'll take you through a general overview of what we're going to be doing in this course and let you see, essentially, what it is that I want you to do from start to finish. And we'll go through and talk about all the different types of things about designing cartoon characters and drawing cartoon characters. And a lot of this stuff will touch on what we're talking about in the actual course itself. So we'll just get right into it. Now, the very first thing that we have to deal with when we're drawing cartoon characters is the understanding that cartoon characters are made up of lines. All drawing is made up of lines. And so what we're doing on the paper is we're actually taking a two-dimensional surface, which is flat. It has no dimension to it. You can see it's just a flat sheet of paper here. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to add depth to it so that it has some dimension. So in order to do that, what we have to do is we have to do what's called drawing three-dimensionally. Sounds simple enough to do, but it's actually harder than that may seem. One of the tools that we have in order to do that is perspective, and I'm sure you've all heard of perspective. We live in a three-dimensional perspective-driven world, and so I'm sure you'll understand some of the basics that we're talking about here. The very first thing that we use when we're doing any type of drawing is a horizon line. A horizon line is basically a line that divides, in the simplest terms, divides the sky up here from the ground down here, and this is the line that we would see that would divide the two of them. This line here is your eye level. So regardless of where you are within an environment, whether you're looking up, down, you're 100 feet off the ground, or you're 10 feet off the ground, or you're at your normal height, whatever that is, or if you're flat down on the ground, which we call worm's eye view, where your eyes are almost touching the ground sideways, it doesn't matter what point of view you still have a horizon line that you have to work from. And the way we perceive things in the world is based largely on, well, it's based completely on the horizon line and the perspective theories. So let's talk about some of the very simple basics now. We have our horizon line, and along the horizon line what we need to do is we need to affix a vanishing point. Now some people will draw a vanishing point that sort of looks like this. They'll draw a smudgy dot that looks like that. I dislike drawing vanishing points like that, and this is the main reason, is that when you've got a horizon line across like this, it's usually a single line. Here I've drawn a few of them, but it's still, you know, you should define it as being one individual line here. The problem with this is that it is not a purely defined point. It's got a space from here to here that could be the vanishing point anywhere within that space, and that's a fairly large space. So what I like to do on my horizon lines is I like to take and just do a slash through it so that my intersection point between these two lines here is my vanishing point, and I find that that works a lot easier for me. Now when we're dealing with one-point perspective, we have a horizon line, a single vanishing point, and with one-point perspective we're looking straight on at something, meaning that you're looking straight at a wall and the wall is parallel or perpendicular to you. You're looking at it from a 90-degree angle. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that the line or the objects that we're drawing are parallel to the horizon line. So we'd have a line something like that. Now what we have to do next is we have to determine the overall dimensions of this object. So we have to determine where the endpoints are. And again, I'm using my little slash lines through there. And then we take and we simply connect the dots, is what I like to call it. We just connect this point up to here and this point across over to here. And you can see I'm not using a ruler. Using a ruler is fine. There's nothing wrong with using a ruler. It's a tool, and some people say it's cheating or something like that. I say it's a tool, and whichever way you can get your drawing done, it doesn't matter how it gets done, just so long as it looks good. So if you can cheat without copying someone else's work with plagiarism or something like that, then by all means go ahead and do it. It's a very valuable tool to you. So we now have our vanishing point up here, the two end lines, the front edge that's closest to us of our plane or object or table or whatever it is we're going to draw, and we've extended two lines back, receding off into the distance. Now what we need to do is we need to determine what the back end point is, how deep it is in perspective to us. So what we do is we draw a line across here like this to define the back edge. And so now we have a dimensional plane here working in 3 dimensions going back in space. Here's our front edge, here's the back edge, and these two lines here are receding. Now you'll notice that this line right here, the width of it, is greater than this one here. That's because one of the basic rules of perspective is the closer something is to you, the larger it is. The further something is away from you, the smaller it is. And you can test that theory out quite simply by doing just this. Take your hands and put them together, and take a look at your hands and observe how large they are together. They should be approximately the same height or size to each other. Now what I want you to do is I want you to stick your one hand right in front of your face like this, and I want you to take your other hand and hold it out like that. Now you can see right here on the television screen, if I just shift my hands around, it's hard to do that and see it. Now I'll do it this way. I can't get it right. But anyways, you get the idea that when you put your hands out like this, and you can see that this hand right here is quite a bit larger than my other hand on the other side. Even though my wrists are lined up in the same point, this hand here is quite a bit smaller. So for you, the viewer, this hand here is quite a bit closer, whereas this hand back here is smaller. So that's the general idea behind perspective. Sorry for goofing up the direction of my hands. But you can try that for yourself and you'll see what I'm talking about. So this is one of the primary fundamentals of perspective, so that when you're looking straight on at some object, you have a single vanishing point, and that vanishing point is always directly to you, and the vanishing point is on the horizon line. So in this case here, because our object is below the horizon line, we're looking down on it. Now if I was to take this and simply reverse it, just by taking the paper off of here and flipping it over, we now have a horizon line that is below the object, and we're now looking up at this object. So it's like it's a ceiling or something, or a tile, or a piece of paper floating in midair. So that's the idea behind one-point perspective. Two-point perspective follows the same general theory, but what we're doing now is we're adding a second vanishing point, and by adding a second vanishing point, what we're doing is we're changing our perception or our point of view of a room. So if you were looking straight on at a wall, your vanishing point would be directly at that wall, straight at the wall. And you can always say that. If I joke with students and I say, anytime you're at a cocktail party or a dinner party or something like that, and someone walks up to you and they say, where's the vanishing point for that wall over there? And all you have to do is just point straight directly at the wall, and you'll have your vanishing point at your horizon line. Now if you're in a room and you want to find two vanishing points, what you do is, if you're looking into the corner, you can point directly at that wall over there, and you look over at the other wall and you point directly to that wall on the opposite side, and you'll have your two vanishing points. So the same theory applies in general to perspective here, is that we have a horizon line that runs across like this, and what we're doing is we're simply, instead of having one vanishing point, we actually have two vanishing points, one here and one over here. And then what we'll do is we'll place, let's say it's a box, we'll take the corner that's closest to us, and we'll draw a line down like this. That's the corner that's closest to us. And then we just determine what are the end points. What's the high point and what's the low point of this box. So let's say we want to make this box as though we're looking down on it from above. So we'll place the high end of the corner there just below the horizon line, and we can erase that. Oops. We can erase this line out like that. And now we have our two endpoints, just the same as we did with the one-point perspective. We had the two endpoints on that one. And it's just a connect the dot game now, where we take this line here and extend it from the vanishing point across to that point there. And we do the same thing with this one. We take this one over here, and then we do the same thing on the opposite side over here. We bring this across like this, and we bring this one down like this, and we have two planes that are going off in perspective. Now all we have to do is just determine the depth of this wall, or this edge of this object over here, and the same thing with this one on the opposite side. If we're trying to make it look like a cube, we want to try and get it as square looking as possible. It's slightly rectangular, but I think you get the idea. So now what we've done is we've created two distinct planes there, and they're both going back. You can see that this is our closest edge, and these lines here are receding off into the distance. This line here is shorter than this line here, so it's further away from us. So we have that perception that it's going back in depth. Now the next thing that we want to do is we want to continue our game of connect the dots by simply taking this point right here, and since we've already gone to this vanishing point over here, we have no choice but to go to this vanishing point over here. So we connect that line across like this to this vanishing point here, And then we do the same thing with this corner over here. We take this one over to the opposing vanishing point there, since we can't take it over to this one. And you'll notice that where the two lines are crisscrossing each other here and here is actually the erased line back there. So we're looking at this at a pure 45-degree angle right on the corner, and so those two lines will line up. And if we draw through as though we were turning this into a glass box, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take from this corner, and I have to go across to this vanishing point over here because I've already been over here. I'm going to take this one, and these two lines are going to bisect right there and behind. And how do I know that? I know that because it did it up here, so it would have to do it down there. So now, by finishing that off, you can see how I've created this two-point perspective box. If I just erase my lines going off to the vanishing points, you can see her a little bit more clearly now. I'll just take my extended lines off. Now, if I wanted to make this a solid box with one end open, what I could do is I could erase this line off here to make this top solid. I could erase this back line here off to make this edge solid, and now we're looking in on this side here. Now, as I take this box, and remember, the same theory applies to the looking up and looking down as it did before. If I take and I flip this over now, you'll see that we're now looking up at the box from below. If I was to take this box and I was to swing this edge here over this way, closer to this vanishing point here, I'll just draw another box that's over here. I'll draw it a little bit lower so we've got some space around it. I'm going to drop it down like this, and then I'm going to take my end points here and here off to my two vanishing points on either side, and I'll end up with a slightly different view of another box within this environment. Oops, that line is really veering off there. I've got to watch where I'm drawing, which is something that we'll talk about later on as well. About thinking when you're drawing and making your corrections to your lines as you go along, not leaving it till the very end. We'll talk about that more later on when we're dealing with the characters. So here I'm drawing my two endpoints on my two sides, and now I'm just going to extend these lines here off to the vanishing point on that side, and I now have a cube that is closer to this vanishing point over here than it is that one, but it's on the same plane, but we're looking down on it more, so it looks like it's slid down towards us a little bit. Now, it's important that you understand these basic principles of perspective. The reason for that is that all your cartoon characters are going to be based on these simple shapes, maybe not cubes in particular, but the understanding of perspective and your perception of the horizon line and how the character relates to the horizon line is extremely important, because we're going to have situations where we're going to have the characters' heads tilted back, or they're going to be tilted off on the side like this, or you may have a down shot where the character's head is like that. And we're going to be dealing with lines called cross contours on the surface of your character that are going to be guidelines for you that will help you to anchor your character's features to their cranial mass or their structure. And so we need to understand these elements of perspective before we go on any further. And this is what your first assignment is all about in your entire package. It's dealing with simple shapes. I want you to do some geometrical shapes like this, where you're dealing with a sphere, a cylinder, a cone, and is it a cone? No, I'm sorry. A sphere, a cylinder, a box, and a rectangle. And I want you to take those simple objects and I want you to arrange them on a two-point perspective plane similar to this. If I was to take and turn this into the assignment, I'd put a floor plane or a ground plane around it, something like this, and end it over here, and then extend this off this way, and then end the other point over here and bring it back to the vanishing point over there. So I'd have my ground plane now, and what I'd then do is I'd add on the cylinder and the sphere to this this plane. So if I was to draw a sphere in here, I'd draw a circle over here, and then I'd draw a cylinder that was sitting maybe somewhere around here. Now, I'm just zipping through this very quickly just to give you a very quick idea of what it is that I'm thinking of on this assignment. But this is basically it. And I'll talk to you just a little bit about ellipses in a few seconds, because we're going to have to deal with ellipses when we're dealing with the cylinders and cross contours for the next assignment right after that. That's essentially what I'm looking for, and of course I'd have to turn one of these into a rectangle in order to make it actually follow the parameters of the assignment. So here I'm just extending this out a little bit further and creating an inside edge there. I'm just adding on an extra box. So that now turns this into a rectangle. There's my cube, there's my sphere, and there's my cylinder over there. So I want you to take and draw something like this, And then what I want you to do is, once you've established where all these elements are within the environment, I want you to then rotate it within your mind to a different point of view and draw it exactly the way it is here, but from a different point of view, so that all your spatial relationships remain the same. And it's important that we understand spatial relationships, because when we get into designing your cartoon characters and you're drawing the character's face, you want to make sure that the points of the facial features, like the distance between the eyes, maintains itself all the way through. The size of the eyes remains the same, the cheeks are in the same position, the mouth is the proper size, etc., etc. You want all those things to be in their proper places. This is what's called keeping your character on model. And a lot of people, when they're drawing, will have this problem where they don't keep their character on model. It slips off model because the features are going all over the place, and things shrink and grow, and that's an absolute no-no. You can't do that in animation. So we have to make sure that we understand these principles and why they're here before we can go on. So when you're doing your first and second assignment, I don't want you to feel, and you will feel this way, but I don't want you to feel like, oh man, I can't believe I have to do this type of an assignment. This is so insanely easy. And, you know, my nephew, who's 2 years old, could do this. Well, that may sound semi-true to yourself, but don't deceive yourself. I've given this assignment to my own students at Sheridan College for years, and I have yet to see anyone do it absolutely perfectly. I've seen so many people that have just goofed up on little tiny things here and there, even though they try really hard. It's a very difficult thing to do. And if you can do it, that's great. I think that's wonderful, and it shows that you're using your observational skills, which is another element of what we're going to be dealing with in this course, is how to observe things, to look at things and perceive them in a certain way, and then be able to translate that into a paper drawing where you've got a three-dimensional character that looks like it's living and breathing on its own. So this visual perception and visual understanding of how your cartoon characters works